The warning spread across the throne room in deadly silence. Several nobles froze mid-breath. A servant near the wall nearly dropped the silver tray in her hands. Even the guards standing beneath the black pillars avoided looking directly at the throne. Because there, against the chest of Supreme Alpha Rhea Morvain, slept a young female Omega. Her head rested beneath the queen's chin. One hand still loosely clutched the front of Rhea's dark coat, fingers curled like a child who had fallen asleep there accidentally and never been moved. Her breathing came soft and even, utterly unaware that 37 people stood frozen in the chamber, terrified to exhale too loudly. The sight felt wrong. Rhea Morvain never allowed anyone near her. Not after the war. Not after the curse had twisted through her blood like poison vines strangling a tree from the inside. Especially not an Omega. Everyone within Blackthorn Citadel knew what happened during those nights. Her feral curse became unstable. Her pheromones flooded entire corridors, thick, violent, predatory. Guards collapsed from pressure alone, their bodies simply giving up against the weight of an alpha whose instincts had turned against her. No healer could touch her without permission. No servant dared enter the royal wing after sunset. Yet this morning, an Omega servant from the lower wing, barely 19 years old, named barely a whisper among the kitchen staff, slept peacefully against the chest of the most dangerous alpha in the kingdom. Lady Mira Ashford swallowed carefully before speaking. Her throat worked visibly beneath her collar, sweat beading at her temple despite the winter chill pressing against the throne room windows. Your Majesty, perhaps the girl should be removed before the southern delegates arrive. Rhea's silver eyes lifted slowly. The room immediately turned colder. Did you not hear me the first time? She asked it quietly. Not a shout. Not a growl. Just those 7 words, spoken in the same tone one might use to comment on the weather. Mira went pale and lowered her head at once. Her knees actually buckled slightly before she caught herself against the noble beside her. No one breathed. No one spoke again. The Omega shifted slightly in her sleep, a small movement, just a turn of her face toward the warmth of Rhea's chest. Her fingers tightened weakly against the queen's coat, as if searching for something even in unconsciousness. Instantly, Rhea's hand moved to steady her. Protective. Instinctive. Several nobles exchanged uneasy glances. That frightened them more than the threat. Because Rhea Morvain had never touched anyone gently. Not once in the 3 years since the curse had claimed her. The truth was, the entire citadel had been in chaos the night before. Rhea had returned from the northern border half covered in blood after destroying a rogue alpha faction near the mountain pass. Her coat had been shredded. Her left side had been torn open by silver blades. By the time she reached the palace, her curse had already started flaring, dark veins crawling up her throat, pupils narrowing to predatory slits, pheromones thickening into something that made even betas feel like prey. The upper royal wing became impossible to enter. Guards stationed at the corridor entrance collapsed within minutes. The pressure from her pheromones spread through the halls like a storm front, heavy and electric and wrong. 2 beta guards lost consciousness outside her chamber doors. One Omega servant, foolish enough to have lingered too long, had to be carried out by 4 guards, her body trembling uncontrollably for hours afterward. Every Omega servant had been evacuated from the entire upper level. No one could get close enough to treat her wounds. Until Alara Vance walked into the room. Alara was nobody important. At 18 years old, she had spent the last 2 years carrying linens and hot water through the lower halls of Blackthorn Citadel. Her hands were calloused from scrubbing stone floors. Her clothes were plain gray wool, patched at the elbows. Most nobles had never even noticed her before, and those who had, looked through her like she was furniture. Her scent was nothing special. Mild chamomile and clean linen, soft enough to disappear in crowded rooms. Her suppressants worked reliably. Her heats came like clockwork every 3 months and passed without incident in the small Omega quarters she shared with 3 other servants. She had no family, no connections, no future beyond these stone walls. That night, a frightened steward had shoved a basin of clean cloths into her hands and ordered her upstairs because no one else would go. "Just drop it inside the door," the steward had said, voice shaking. "Don't look at her. Don't speak. Just don't be there longer than you have to." Alara had nodded, too tired to be properly afraid. She should have been terrified. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, to drop the basin, to run back to her tiny cot in the lower wing and pretend she had never received the order. But Alara had learned long ago that fear was a luxury poor Omegas couldn't afford. So she climbed the stairs. The moment she entered the royal chamber, she understood why everyone had refused. Rhea stood near the balcony doors, one hand braced against the stone archway, breathing unevenly. Blood ran down her side, dark, almost black in the moonlight, dripping onto the marble floor in slow, rhythmic splatters. Her coat had been discarded somewhere. She wore only a torn black shirt beneath, the fabric soaked through and clinging to the wound beneath. But it wasn't the blood that made Alara's knees weaken. It was the scent. Alpha pheromones crushed against her lungs like a physical weight. Not the controlled, civilized scent Rhea wore during court appearances, cedar and smoke and cold mountain air. This was feral, raw, predatory in a way that made something ancient and terrified uncurl in the base of Alara's spine. "Run," her Omega instinct screamed. "Run, run, run." "Leave," Rhea growled without turning around. The word hit Alara like a wall. Not loud, barely above a whisper, but the command behind it was absolute. Supreme alpha pheromones laced the syllable, heavy enough to make Alara's knees buckle. She almost obeyed. Almost. Then she saw the blood soaking through the queen's bandages. They were wrong. Whoever had wrapped them had done so in panic, too tight in some places, too loose in others, and the wound beneath was still bleeding freely. If it wasn't properly cleaned by morning, infection would set in. And with Rhea's curse already unstable. "You're injured," Alara said quietly. Rhea finally looked at her. For one terrible second, Alara thought she would die there. The queen's eyes had gone almost wolf-like under the moonlight. Her pupils had narrowed to thin vertical slits, ringed with silver that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. Her canines had lengthened, not fully shifted, but close enough to be visible when she bared her teeth. Dangerous. Cold. Unstable. The pheromones in the room thickened further, pressing against Alara's lungs until spots danced at the edges of her vision. But Alara still stepped closer. Her hands shook while she reached for the clean cloths in her basin. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. Every instinct screamed at her to drop everything and flee. But she had seen wounded alphas before, during the rogue attacks that sometimes reached the outer districts, when injured soldiers were brought into the healer's wing where Alara occasionally assisted. She knew what happened when wounds went untreated. And something about the way Rhea stood there, bleeding alone in the dark, made Alara's chest ache in a way she didn't understand. Rhea watched every movement carefully. The air grew heavier around them, charged with something that made Alara's skin prickle. The queen's hand tightened against the stone archway, cracking it slightly beneath her grip. Then suddenly Rhea moved. Fast enough that Alara didn't even see it coming. One moment she was several feet away. The next, the queen's hand closed around her wrist, crushing, inescapable, the heat of her skin searing through Alara's sleeve. Alara gasped. The basin nearly slipped from her other hand. Rhea's silver eyes bored into hers. The dark veins of the curse were visible now, crawling up the side of her neck like fractured glass beneath her skin. Her breathing had gone shallow. Her pheromones pulsed in waves, each one stronger than the last, pressing against Alara until spots swam across her vision. "Why?" the queen demanded. Her voice had gone rougher, less human. "Why aren't you running?" Alara looked directly at her. Her entire body trembled. Fear flooded her senses, sharp and metallic on her tongue. But beneath the fear, something else stirred, something she had never felt before. A strange, impossible pull toward this alpha who should have terrified her beyond reason. "Please," Alara whispered. "Let me help." Something changed in Ria's expression. Not completely. Not safely. But enough. The pressure in the room eased by a fraction. The queen's grip on her wrist loosened, not releasing, but no longer crushing. Her pheromones still swirled heavy and dangerous through the chamber, but the edge had softened, just slightly. Ria stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, she released Alara's wrist. "Fine." For the next hour, Alara cleaned her wounds while expecting death every time she touched her. The wound along Ria's ribs was worse than she had expected. Deep enough that Alara could see muscle beneath, ragged at the edges where silver blades had torn rather than cut. The bleeding had slowed but not stopped. The bandages were soaked through. Alara worked methodically, trying not to let her hands shake. She had done this before, not on a supreme alpha, not on someone whose pheromones made the very air feel thick as water, but the motions were the same. Clean the wound. Apply pressure. Bandage properly. Every time her fingers brushed against Ria's skin, the queen's breathing hitched. Not pain. Something else. The curse veins along her neck would pulse once, then recede slightly. Her pheromones would spike, then settle. It was like touching a live wire and somehow not getting electrocuted. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" Ria asked at one point. Her voice had gone quieter now. Less commanding. Almost curious. Alara didn't look up from the wound. "I am afraid." "Then why are you still here?" "Because you're bleeding." Silence. Ria said nothing more for the rest of the hour. But she also didn't move away. Didn't growl. Didn't threaten. And when Alara finally finished and stepped back, hands bloody and trembling, the queen simply looked at her with those impossible silver eyes and said nothing at all. By dawn, the violent aura shaking the upper tower had gone quiet for the first time in months. Alara didn't remember falling asleep. One moment she had been sitting on the edge of the massive royal bed, exhausted beyond reason, watching Ria's chest rise and fall as the queen finally rested. The next, darkness had closed over her, soft and warm and safe in a way she hadn't felt since childhood. When awareness crept back, it came slowly. She was warm. Unusually warm. There was something solid beneath her cheek, rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. Something heavy draped over her back. And beneath it all, a scent that made her omega instincts purr with contentment. Cedar. Smoke. Cold mountain air. And beneath that, something darker. Something that smelled like home, though Alara had never had one of those. She shifted slightly, pressing closer to the warmth without thinking. A low sound rumbled above her. Not quite a growl. Not quite a purr. Something between them that vibrated through her bones and made her sigh softly. Then, "Your Majesty, perhaps the girls should be removed before the southern delegates arrive." The voice cut through the haze like a blade. Alara's eyes opened. She was lying against Ria Morvain's chest. The Supreme Alpha's arm was wrapped around her waist, possessive and absolute, holding her in place like she belonged there. One of Alara's hands still clutched the front of Ria's dark coat, the same coat from last night, now wrinkled and blood-stained beneath her fingers. Her legs were tangled with the queen's beneath a heavy black blanket. And they were in the throne room. Alara's heart stopped. She remembered now faintly, distantly, being carried through the palace halls in the early morning. Ria had refused to let her walk. had simply lifted her against her chest like she weighed nothing and walked through the corridors while servants pressed themselves against walls and guards averted their eyes. Alara had been too exhausted to protest. Now the entire court was staring at her. "Did you not hear me the first time?" Ria's voice. Quiet. Deadly. Alara felt the words more than heard them, felt the pressure behind them, the pheromones that sharpened with the queen's displeasure. The air in the throne room seemed to thicken, pressing down on everyone present. Lady Mira Ashford went pale and lowered her head at once. "Apologies, Your Majesty." No one else spoke. Alara should have moved. Should have scrambled off the queen's lap, dropped to her knees, apologized profusely for the impropriety. She was an Omega servant. She had no business being anywhere near the throne, let alone sleeping on the queen's chest in full view of the court. But Ria's arm tightened around her waist when she tried to shift. "Don't," the queen said. Just that one word. Quiet. Absolute. Alara froze. Ria's silver eyes met hers. Something passed between them. Alara couldn't name it, couldn't understand it, but it made heat rise to her cheeks and her heart stutter in her chest. Then the queen looked away, toward the gathered court, and the moment shattered. The throne room doors opened again as royal healers entered carrying fresh bandages. They stopped instantly after seeing the Omega asleep against Ria. One healer, a young beta with spectacles, whispered under her breath, "How's she still alive?" Ria heard her. The queen's gaze shifted toward the healer, and the young woman immediately lowered her eyes, face draining of color. Before anyone else could speak, Alara made a soft sound in her sleep. She hadn't even realized she was drifting off again, and tightened her grip weakly against Ria's coat. Everything about the queen changed at once. Her attention snapped back to the Omega. The dangerous tension in the room sharpened immediately, pheromones spiking with something that made several nobles take involuntary steps backward. "Careful," Ria said softly. That single word made the truth painfully obvious to everyone present. The Supreme Alpha was not protecting the throne. She was protecting the Omega sleeping against her. By the second day, everyone in Blackthorn Citadel knew the Omega's name. Alara Vance. Servants whispered it in kitchens. Guards muttered it during shift changes. Even the nobles lowered their voices when discussing her, as if saying her name too loudly might summon the Supreme Alpha herself. Because Ria Morvain still had not sent her away. That frightened people more than the throne room incident. The Northern Queen had always been feared, but at least her cruelty followed rules people understood. She hated being touched. She avoided Omegas entirely. She trusted almost no one. Yet now an unknown Omega servant moved freely through the royal wing while the queen allowed it. No one knew what that meant. Alara herself barely understood it either. She stood quietly near the long table inside the Western Strategy Chamber while snow hammered against the high windows outside. Maps covered the dark oak surface beneath flickering candlelight. Several military commanders spoke in intense voices about border patrols and rogue alpha attacks. Alara tried not to listen too closely. Her attention kept drifting toward Ria. The queen stood near the far window, one hand braced against the stone wall. Even after several days, the wounds along her ribs still hadn't healed properly. Alara could smell blood beneath the heavy scent of cedar, smoke, and cold alpha pheromones. Ria looked exhausted. Not weak, never weak. Just tired in a way that made her seem dangerous for completely different reasons. "Your Majesty," one commander said carefully, "the eastern villages are requesting additional guards after the last attack." Ria answered without turning around. "Send them." Another commander hesitated before speaking. "There are also rumors spreading through the lower districts." The room tensed immediately. Ria finally looked over her shoulder. "What rumors?" The commander visibly swallowed. "That the Omega beside you is connected to the curse." Silence. Ilara lowered her eyes instantly, pretending to focus on the tea tray in her hands. She had already heard worse. Omega servants stopped talking whenever she entered a room. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with fear. A few refused to stand too close to her entirely. Ria's expression remained unreadable. And the temple? Becoming concerned, Your Majesty. High Priestess Malker has requested audience twice already. Of course they were. High Priestess Malker, tall, gaunt, draped in crimson robes lined with gold, had visited the royal wing twice already that week. Both times, Ria had refused to let her inside. The queen turned back toward the window. Then let them be concerned. The discussion ended there. Nobody pushed further. Eventually, the commanders bowed and left the chamber. One by one, their footsteps faded down the corridor until only Ilara and Ria remained inside the room. The silence felt different now. Not comfortable exactly, but no longer terrifying. Ilara carefully crossed the chamber and placed the untouched tea near the maps. You should eat something, Your Majesty. Ria's eyes moved toward her slowly. Are you giving orders now? The question should have sounded threatening. Instead, there was something quieter underneath it. Dry amusement, maybe. Ilara immediately lowered her head. No, Your Majesty. A long pause followed. Then Ria spoke again. You keep trembling every time you speak to me. Ilara froze. She hadn't realized the queen noticed. Ria noticed everything. I'm trying not to, Ilara admitted softly. For some reason, that answer made Ria stare at her longer. The pressure in the room shifted, not dangerous, just heavy. Enough to make Ilara suddenly aware of how close she stood to an alpha powerful enough to make entire rooms submit without speaking. Ria's gaze drifted briefly toward Ilara's neck. Only for a second. Still, Ilara felt it immediately, the weight of that attention, the way it made her scent spike with something she couldn't control. Her hand rose unconsciously to cover her scent gland, where her pulse pounded beneath her fingers. Ria looked away first. Change the bandages, the queen said quietly. Relief mixed strangely with nervousness inside Ilara's chest. Tasks were easier than silence. She moved carefully closer while Ria sat in the heavy chair beside the table. The queen loosened the dark coat around her shoulders, enough to expose the fresh bandages wrapped across her ribs. Ilara inhaled softly. The wound looked better than before, but not by much. You reopened it again, she murmured before thinking. Ria's silver eyes lifted toward her. You always speak this freely? Ilara instantly regretted the comment. Sorry. But Ria only leaned back in the chair and closed her eyes briefly. Continue. Ilara carefully removed the blood-stained bandages. Her fingers still shook sometimes when touching the queen, though less than before. That frightened her a little because she was getting used to this. Used to Ria's scent. Used to the dangerous calm that settled over the room whenever the queen allowed her near. As Ilara cleaned the wound, Ria's breathing slowly deepened. The violent edge in her pheromones weakened. Ilara noticed it immediately. So did Ria. The queen opened her eyes again. Their gazes met for one suspended second before Ilara looked down quickly. You're doing it again, Ria said. Ilara blinked. Doing what? Calming me. The words landed heavily between them. Neither spoke afterward. Ilara's hands stilled on the bandages. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Because she had felt it too, the way the pressure in the room eased when she was close, the way Ria's curse seemed to settle whenever Ilara touched her. She had been telling herself it was coincidence. Imagination. Desperation. But Ria had just confirmed it. Outside the chamber, footsteps suddenly approached fast. Then came a sharp knock against the doors. Your Majesty. Ria's expression hardened instantly. Enter. A royal guard stepped inside and bowed quickly. High Priestess Malker requests an audience. Ria did not answer immediately. The air in the chamber cooled several degrees. Denied. The guard hesitated. She insists it concerns the Omega. Ilara stiffened automatically. Rhea noticed that too. Something dark flickered across her expression before disappearing again. Send her away. The guard bowed and hurried back out. Silence returned. But this time, it felt tighter. Ilara carefully tied the final bandage in place. The temple really believes I'm dangerous, don't they? Rhea stood slowly from the chair. They fear what they do not control. That doesn't answer the question. For a moment, Rhea simply looked at her. Then the queen stepped closer. Too close. Ilara's breath caught as the scent of cold cedar and dark alpha pheromones surrounded her completely. Rhea's presence pressed against her like a living thing, making her Omega instincts sing with a mixture of terror and something far more dangerous. You survived my curse, Rhea said quietly. That alone is enough to frighten this kingdom. Ilara tried to steady her breathing. Does it frighten you? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Immediately, silence filled the room. Rhea's eyes narrowed, not angry, more surprised that Ilara dared ask. Then slowly, the queen reached up and brushed her fingers against Ilara's wrist. The same wrist she had grabbed that first night. The touch lasted barely a second. Still, heat rushed through Ilara's entire body instantly. Her scent spiked, chamomile and linen blooming into something richer, something Omega in a way she had never experienced before. Rhea seemed to feel it too. Her hand withdrew at once. The atmosphere changed again, sharper, more dangerous. Neither spoke. Then suddenly, somewhere deep inside the royal wing, a loud crash echoed through the corridor. A servant screamed. Rhea moved instantly. The pressure from her pheromones exploded through the room, hard enough to make Ilara stumble backward. The queen crossed the chamber in seconds and threw open the doors. Two terrified servants stood frozen outside near shattered glass, trays scattered across the floor. Between them, a young Omega servant struggled to breathe, panicked tears running down her face. Rhea's curse aura had spread through the corridor again. The Omega servant looked close to collapsing. Every guard nearby immediately stepped backward. All except Ilara. Without thinking, she walked past them and reached for Rhea's arm. Your Majesty. The moment her fingers touched the queen's sleeve, the hallway changed. The crushing pressure weakened instantly. Not gone, but controlled. The guards stared openly. The trembling Omega servant finally managed to inhale properly again. Rhea went perfectly still beneath Ilara's hand. Slowly, the queen looked down at her. Their faces stood dangerously close now. Ilara realized too late what she had done and tried to step back immediately. Rhea caught her wrist before she could. Not rough. Not painful. But firm enough to stop her. The entire corridor fell silent. Rhea's gaze lowered briefly toward Ilara's hand gripping her sleeve, then toward the frightened Omega servant still recovering nearby. Understanding spread across every face present at the same time. Ilara could calm the Supreme Alpha. The realization terrified the guards. Terrified Ilara even more. Rhea still had not let go of her wrist. At the far end of the corridor, another voice suddenly broke the silence. Well, Malker said coldly, stepping from the shadows beneath the archway. Now I understand why the temple is concerned. The high priestess's eyes settled directly on Ilara. This is no longer a rumor, she said quietly. It is becoming a threat. The first sign something was wrong came 11 days later. Ilara awoke suddenly in the darkness with heat crawling beneath her skin. At first, she thought the room was simply too warm. The fireplace beside the far wall still burned low, and heavy winter blankets covered her from the waist down. But within seconds, the discomfort sharpened into something deeper. Her breathing grew uneven. Her pulse sped up painfully. And the scent filling the room no longer smelled only like cedar, smoke, and cold stone. It smelled like alpha pheromones. Strong. Overwhelming. Wrong. Alara pushed herself upright too quickly and nearly lost her balance as dizziness hit her. Her suppressants, she had taken them. She always took them. Omega servants inside Blackthorn Citadel were required to take suppressants regularly, specifically to avoid incidents near high-ranking alphas. But now her body felt feverish. Wrong in a way she had never experienced before. Her heat wasn't supposed to come for another 6 weeks. A soft knock came from outside her chamber door. Alara. The sound of Ria's voice made heat rush violently through her entire body. Alara's stomach dropped. No, this was bad. She quickly grabbed the glass vial of suppressants from the bedside table. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it. Empty. Her chest tightened instantly. She had been so distracted, so consumed by whatever was happening between her and the Queen, that she had forgotten to request a new vial. Another knock. Lower this time. More dangerous. Open the door. Alara pressed both hands against her mouth and tried to steady her breathing. The scent outside the room had grown stronger already, heavy alpha pheromones rolling beneath the doorway like smoke, thick enough to make her Omega instincts whimper with need. Ria knew. Of course she knew. Supreme alphas could detect heat cycles almost immediately, especially unstable ones. Alara. The Queen's voice sounded rougher now. Not angry. Controlled. Which somehow felt worse. Alara forced herself toward the door before Ria decided to break it down instead. The moment she opened it, cold fear shot through her. Ria stood outside wearing only a loose black shirt beneath her coat. Silver eyes fixed entirely on Alara, pupils blown wide, dark veins of the curse crawling up her throat in the flickering torchlight. Her pheromones rolled off her in waves, cedar and smoke, and something darker, something feral that made Alara's knees buckle. The hallway behind the Queen was empty. Every guard and servant had already been removed from the royal wing. Ria had cleared the entire corridor for her. You're entering heat, the Queen said quietly. Alara hated how weak her voice sounded when she answered. The suppressants stopped working. I forgot to request more. I'm sorry. Ria's jaw tightened. The scent between them thickened immediately. Alara suddenly understood the real problem. This wasn't only her heat. Ria's rut instincts were reacting too. The curse made her alpha instincts unstable, unpredictable. If Ria's rut triggered while Alara was in heat, the realization made her pulse spike harder. I can leave the royal wing, Alara said quickly. If I go downstairs. No. The answer came instantly. Sharp. Absolute. Ria stepped inside the room before Alara could respond and shut the door behind her. The atmosphere changed immediately. The alpha pheromones surrounding Ria pressed against Alara's senses, hard enough to make her knees weaken. She grabbed the edge of the table beside her to steady herself. Ria noticed. Her eyes darkened. Sit down. Alara obeyed before realizing she had. That alone unsettled her. Ria had never used that tone with her before, not truly commanding, not with alpha pheromones layered beneath the words. Ria remained standing several feet away, as though forcing distance between them physically. Her hands stayed clenched at her sides. Every muscle in her body looked tight with restraint. You shouldn't be near me right now, Ria said quietly. Then why did you come here? Silence. The Queen's gaze shifted away, briefly toward the frost-covered windows, then back to Alara again. Because the moment your heat started, Ria stopped speaking. Her jaw flexed. The dark veins along her neck pulsed once, twice. Alara swallowed hard. What happened? Ria looked at her for several long seconds before answering. I could smell you across the entire royal wing. The confession sent another wave of heat through Alara's body. The room suddenly felt too small. Ria moved farther back instead of closer. That hurt unexpectedly. I'll have the healers prepare another chamber, the Queen said. You'll remain isolated until the heat passes. Alara nodded quickly, even though disappointment twisted strangely inside her chest. Why disappointment? This was safer. Necessary. Still, something about the distance between them suddenly felt unbearable. Rhea stepped toward the door, then stopped. A low sound escaped her throat. Not human. More wolf than woman. Alara looked up sharply. The queen's breathing had changed. Slower. Heavier. Her silver eyes remained locked on Alara, now with dangerous intensity. The scent of alpha pheromones flooding the room thickened violently. Alara's omega instincts reacted immediately. Heat surged through her, hard enough to make her hands tremble. Rhea noticed at once. Damn it. The curse inside her was reacting. The Supreme Alpha turned away immediately and braced one hand against the wall. The stone beneath her fingers cracked sharply. Your Majesty, don't come closer. The warning sounded rough. Painfully strained. Alara froze. Rhea kept her head lowered, shoulders tense beneath the dim firelight. Her control was slipping. Alara could feel it in the violent pressure filling the room. But beneath the danger, something else terrified her more. Rhea was fighting herself for her. You should lock me inside another chamber, Alara whispered. Rhea laughed once under her breath. The sound held no humor. You think walls would matter right now? Alara's breath caught. Slowly, Rhea lifted her head again. Her pupils had narrowed completely, wolf-like, predatory. Yet despite that terrifying gaze, she still had not moved toward Alara once. Not once. That realization hit harder than fear itself. Rhea crossed the room suddenly, toward the cabinet near the fireplace. She pulled out a dark glass bottle. Suppressant liquor, strong enough to dull alpha rut symptoms temporarily. The queen drank without hesitation. Then another. Still, the scent around her barely weakened. Alara could see frustration building beneath her calm exterior. Why is this happening? Rhea's eyes met hers. Because my instincts recognize you. The room went silent. Alara stared at her. The queen looked away first. As what? Alara asked quietly. Rhea did not answer. That silence became answer enough. A dangerous warmth spread low in Alara's chest. Despite the fear, she should have been terrified. Instead, her omega instincts kept pulling her closer, toward the alpha trying desperately not to touch her. Rhea suddenly spoke again. Do you know what the worst part is? Alara shook her head slowly. The queen's expression tightened. I can hear your heartbeat. The confession shattered whatever distance remained between them. Emotionally, at least. Rhea looked exhausted now, not physically, emotionally. Like a woman standing on the edge of losing control and hating herself for it. Alara slowly stood from the bed. Immediately, Rhea's attention sharpened dangerously. I told you not to move. You also haven't stopped me once tonight. That silence again. Heavy. Charged. Rhea's jaw flexed visibly. Alara took another careful step forward. Then another. The scent between them became unbearable now, thick with heat and restraint, and something neither of them wanted to name yet. Finally, Rhea spoke through clenched control. Alara. The way she said Alara's name made her pulse stutter. Go back. But her voice no longer sounded like an order. It sounded like pleading. That changed everything. Alara stopped directly in front of her. Close enough now to see how hard Rhea's hands trembled. The Supreme Alpha. The most feared woman in the kingdom. Shaking because she was trying not to hurt an Omega. Alara's chest tightened painfully. Without thinking further, she reached up and touched Rhea's wrist gently. The reaction was immediate. The violent pheromones choking the room steadied instantly. Rhea inhaled sharply. Her eyes lowered toward their joined hands, like she couldn't believe what she was feeling. Alara felt it too. The terrifying pressure inside the room softened. Not disappeared. Balanced. Rhea slowly lifted her free hand toward Alara's face, then stopped halfway. That hesitation hurt more than if she had touched her. "Your Majesty." "Don't call me that right now." The words came low. Rough. Rhea stepped closer at last. One movement, enough to trap Alara between the queen's body and the edge of the table behind her. Still, Rhea never actually touched her. The restraint itself became unbearable. The queen lowered her forehead against Alara's slowly. Their breaths mixed. Alara closed her eyes automatically. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Rhea turned her head slightly. Her lips brushed dangerously close to Alara's mouth. Almost a kiss. Almost. But she stopped herself again. A rough breath escaped her instead. "If I cross this line tonight," Rhea whispered, "I will never let you go." The confession sent heat crashing through Alara harder than before. Not fear. Not anymore. Something worse. Want. Rhea stepped back instantly after saying it, like the words themselves frightened her. But before she could create distance again, Alara grabbed the front of her shirt. Weakly. Desperately. The movement froze both of them. Alara's voice came barely above a whisper. "Then stop pushing me away." For the first time since entering the room, Rhea looked completely undone. The mask cracked. Just for a second. Then slowly, carefully, the Supreme Alpha pulled Alara into her arms. Not possessive. Not violent. Just desperate. And for the first time in years, Rhea Morvain finally slept without fighting the monster inside her. By morning, the entire royal wing knew something had changed. No one said it directly, of course. Nobody inside Blackthorn Citadel was foolish enough to openly discuss the Supreme Alpha's private affairs. Still, servants noticed things. Rhea stopped allowing other Omegas near her chambers completely. Alara's scent lingered everywhere inside the Western Wing now. And most terrifying of all, the Queen had become calmer. Not softer. Never soft. Quieter. In a way that unsettled the court far more than rage ever had. Alara noticed it too. 3 days had passed since the heat incident, yet Rhea barely left her side anymore. Meetings were moved into the Western Strategy Chamber. Meals arrived through guarded corridors. Even the royal healers were searched before entering the wing. It felt less like protection and more like isolation. As if the Queen was building invisible walls around her. Alara stood near the tall windows of the strategy chamber while snow drifted across the mountains outside. Behind her, Rhea sat at the long oak table, reviewing reports from the eastern border. At least pretending to. Her attention kept drifting back toward Alara every few minutes. The first few times, Alara ignored it. By the 7th, she finally turned around. "Why do you keep staring at me?" Rhea didn't even look embarrassed. "You noticed." That doesn't answer the question. A long pause followed. Then the Queen closed the report in front of her. "You smell different after heat." The blunt honesty made warmth rush straight into Alara's face. Rhea noticed that too. Something unreadable flickered briefly across her expression before she looked away again. Silence between them no longer felt awkward now. That frightened Alara more than anything else. Because she was beginning to understand Rhea in dangerous ways. The Queen rarely spoke directly about emotions. But her actions revealed everything. The guards rotating outside Alara's chambers had doubled overnight. The servants delivering meals were changed constantly so nobody stayed near her too long. And every time another alpha came within arm's reach of Alara, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Rhea never commented on it. She didn't need to. A sharp knock interrupted the quiet. The moment Rhea's expression hardened, Alara already knew who stood outside. "Enter," the Queen said coldly. High Priestess Malker stepped into the chamber, wearing dark crimson robes lined with gold chains. Behind her followed royal healer Saren, an older beta woman carrying several ancient scrolls beneath one arm. Malker's eyes immediately moved toward Alara. Disapproval darkened her face almost instantly. Rhea noticed. "Say what you came here to say." The priestess folded her hands calmly. Rumors are spreading beyond the capital now. The people are beginning to believe the Omega beside you is influencing your curse. Elara lowered her gaze quietly. Rhea remained expressionless. Fear becomes dangerous when left uncontrolled. The kingdom fears you already. Malker's voice sharpened. That was before you started protecting an unknown Omega like a royal consort. The room went still. Even Saren looked uncomfortable after those words. Rhea's silver eyes sharpened immediately. Careful, Malker. The priestess did not back down this time. Your Majesty, the temple has a responsibility to investigate abnormalities tied to the royal bloodline. Elara finally spoke. I didn't do anything. Malker turned toward her slowly. That may be true. The answer somehow sounded worse. Rhea rose from her chair. The pressure in the room changed instantly. I will not repeat myself again, the queen said quietly. Elara stays here. Malker's expression tightened. You are allowing instinct to cloud judgment. No. Rhea's voice dropped lower. I am preventing this kingdom from touching something it does not understand. Silence crashed through the chamber. Elara looked toward Rhea slowly. Something about that sentence felt strange. Not just protective. Personal. Before Malker could respond again, Saren suddenly stepped forward. That is enough. The old healer's voice cut through the tension unexpectedly. Both Rhea and the priestess looked toward her. Saren carefully placed the ancient scrolls across the table. There are things Her Majesty deserves to know before this escalates further. Malker's expression darkened instantly. Saren, you already know I'm right. The room grew colder. Elara's pulse started rising without understanding why. Saren slowly unrolled one of the faded documents across the oak table. Ancient symbols covered the brittle parchment, sketches of crescent marks and bloodline records. Then the healer looked directly at Elara. Show me your wrist. Elara froze. Rhea's eyes narrowed immediately. Why? Saren remained calm. Because I believe the answer to this kingdom's fear has been standing inside this chamber the entire time. The atmosphere tightened dangerously. Elara hesitated. Then, slowly, she pulled back the sleeve around her right wrist. A faint silver scar curved against the inside of her skin. Small. Barely noticeable. She had always assumed it was a birthmark. But the moment Saren saw it, she exhaled heavily. Malker swore under her breath. Rhea went completely still. Elara looked between them in confusion. What is this? Saren's expression looked grim now. 30 years ago, the royal family ordered the destruction of a bloodline known as the Lunar Omegas. Silence. Their pheromones possessed abnormal resonance abilities with feral alphas. They could calm instability, suppress violent instincts, even form unusually deep bonds. Elara's stomach tightened slowly. No, Malker interrupted sharply. That bloodline was eradicated. Apparently not. Rhea had not spoken once. She stood near the edge of the table, staring directly at Elara's wrist with unreadable intensity. Suddenly, dozens of moments began replaying inside Elara's mind. The queen calming when touched. The pheromones stabilizing. The way Rhea always reacted to her scent. The heat incident. The almost kiss. A terrible realization formed slowly inside her chest. You knew, Elara whispered. Rhea's gaze finally lifted to hers. Silence answered first. Elara took a step backward unconsciously. You knew from the beginning. Not everything, Rhea said quietly. But enough. The hurt in Elara's chest surprised her. She should have felt afraid. Instead, disappointment spread through her first. All this time, she had started believing their connection was personal. Now suddenly it felt planned by fate instead. Useful. Necessary. Is that why you kept me here? Elara asked softly. Because I calm your curse? Rhea immediately frowned. Elara. Was I ever anything more than that? The room fell silent. Even Malker looked uncomfortable now. Rhea stepped toward her slowly. That is not what this is. Then what is it? For the first time since Alara met her, the Supreme Alpha hesitated openly. That hesitation hurt more than any answer could have. Rhea looked exhausted suddenly. Not physically. Emotionally cornered. Her eyes lowered briefly before lifting back to Alara again. When you touched me that first night, she said quietly, the curse stopped tearing through my head. For the first time in years. The room remained completely silent. Rhea continued anyway. I tried to send you away afterward. Alara's breath caught. I told myself it was instinct. A bloodline reaction. Something temporary. Rhea's jaw tightened faintly. Then I realized I was watching every doorway, waiting for you to return. Something inside Alara softened painfully. Rhea stepped closer again. This time, Alara did not move away. The monster inside me becomes quiet around you, Rhea admitted. But that is not the part that frightens me anymore. Their eyes locked. And suddenly Alara understood. Rhea was not afraid of the curse. She was afraid of needing someone. The unrest reached the palace gates 3 days later. At first, it sounded distant, scattered shouting rising from the lower districts beneath Blackthorn Citadel. But by nightfall, the noise had grown loud enough to echo through the royal halls. Crowds had gathered near the temple square carrying torches despite the heavy snowfall. Some demanded answers about the curse. Others shouted Alara's name openly. By midnight, they were calling her a monster. Inside the Western Strategy Chamber, silence pressed heavily against the walls. Rhea stood near the frost-covered windows overlooking the city below, while commanders argued around the long table. None of them sounded calm anymore. The temple refuses to disperse the crowds. The southern nobles are demanding an audience. If panic spreads farther east, trade routes will shut down before winter ends. Rhea said nothing. That silence frightened everyone more than shouting would have. Alara remained near the far wall beside the fireplace, trying not to draw attention to herself. But every conversation eventually circled back toward her anyway. She could feel it, the fear, the suspicion, the growing belief that she did not belong inside the palace anymore. A sharp knock interrupted the chamber. One of the royal guards entered quickly and bowed. Your Majesty, High Priestess Malker requests immediate entry. Rhea's expression darkened instantly. Denied. Your Majesty, she's already here. The doors opened before anyone else could react. Malker stepped into the chamber with several temple officials behind her. Snow clung to the edges of their robes, but the priestess herself looked perfectly composed. Too composed. The city is becoming unstable, Malker said calmly. This cannot continue. Rhea finally turned toward her. Then control your followers. They're frightened. They're listening to you. A dangerous silence followed. Malker's eyes shifted briefly toward Alara. The kingdom believes the Lunar Omega has awakened your curse. The kingdom believes whatever fear tells it to believe. And what do you believe, Your Majesty? The room went still. Rhea's jaw tightened faintly. Alara already knew the answer before the queen spoke. I believe none of you are touching her. The atmosphere changed instantly. Several nobles near the table visibly lowered their eyes. Malker stepped closer. You are choosing one Omega over the stability of your entire kingdom. No. Rhea's voice dropped to something dangerous. I am choosing not to sacrifice an innocent person because frightened people need something to blame. The priestess's calm expression finally cracked slightly. This is no longer about innocence. The people are demanding action. Rhea's pheromones surged sharply through the chamber. Every alpha in the room stiffened. Then they can demand quietly. Silence crashed down again. Alara looked toward Rhea slowly. The queen had not hesitated once. Not once. And somehow that hurt more than the accusations outside, because every time Rhea defended her, the kingdom turned more violently against her in return. The meeting ended shortly afterward. Nobody wanted to remain in the room once Rhea's control started slipping. By the time the chamber emptied, only Alara and Rhea remained beside the dying firelight. Neither spoke immediately. Snow continued falling heavily beyond the windows. Finally, Alara broke the silence first. You should let them send me away. Rhea's eyes lifted instantly. No. They're tearing the city apart because of me. They were looking for fear long before you appeared. That doesn't change anything. Rhea crossed the room toward her slowly. It changes everything. Alara looked away first. That made Rhea's expression tighten faintly. You think leaving would fix this? The queen asked quietly. It would stop them from turning against you. You think I care more about public opinion than your safety? That's not what I meant. Then explain it to me. The pressure in the room thickened sharply. Not violent. Worse. Emotional. Alara struggled to steady her breathing. Ever since I came here, your curse has worsened. The nobles are turning against you. The temple wants your throne weakened. Her voice lowered slightly. I don't want to become the reason you lose everything. Rhea stared at her for several long seconds. Then she laughed once under her breath. The sound carried no humor at all. You still don't understand. Before Alara could answer, Rhea stepped closer and grabbed her wrist. Not gently. Desperately. The reason I'm losing control, Rhea said quietly, is because every person in this kingdom suddenly wants to take you away from me. Alara's heartbeat stumbled painfully. The queen realized what she had admitted the exact moment the words left her mouth. Silence filled the room. Rhea slowly released her wrist, but the confession remained, hanging heavily between them. That night, Alara could not sleep. The palace corridors had become eerily quiet. Most servants avoided the western wing completely now. Guards lined every entrance. Torches burned outside the windows below, where crowds still gathered near the temple district. Alara sat alone near the fireplace inside her chamber, staring at the flames while Rhea's words repeated endlessly inside her head. Take you away from me. Not protect the kingdom. Not stabilize the curse. You. A soft knock came at the door. Alara immediately stood. Come in. One of the younger servants entered, carrying folded blankets. The girl looked nervous. They sent extra supplies for the storm, she explained quietly. Alara nodded. Thank you. The servant hesitated before leaving. Then finally whispered, Please be careful. Alara frowned. What do you mean? The servant lowered her voice further. People are saying the temple plans to force the queen's hand. Soon. Cold dread settled inside Alara's chest instantly. After the servant left, Alara stood motionless for a long time. Then, finally, slowly, she made a decision. By dawn, Alara Vance had disappeared from the royal wing. The first guard discovered it minutes after sunrise. The second Rhea heard the news, the entire palace changed. The western corridor exploded under alpha pheromones, violent enough to crack stone walls. Guards dropped to one knee instantly. Several servants collapsed entirely from the pressure. Find her. Rhea's voice no longer sounded human. Every search party in Blackthorn Citadel moved at once. The Temple District. The lower city. The outer gates. Nothing. Hours passed. Then one scout returned, pale-faced, from the northern pass. There are tracks leading toward the mountain road. Rhea moved before the sentence even finished. Snowstorms tore violently across the cliffs outside Blackthorn as the queen rode north alone. No guards. No council. No control left. By the time Rhea finally found Alara, night had already fallen across the mountains. Alara stood beneath the abandoned shrine overlooking the frozen valley, half covered in snow. Her thin servant's coat was soaked through. Her lips had gone blue. But when she saw Rhea approaching through the storm, her face fell. You shouldn't have come. Rhea stopped several feet away. Her breathing sounded rough beneath the wind. You left. Alara looked away painfully. I was trying to protect you. By disappearing. The kingdom was turning against you because of me. No. Rhea stepped closer through the snow. The kingdom turned against you because they feared what I would become for you. The words hit harder than the freezing wind. Alara's throat tightened. Rhea, do not leave me again. The confession came low. Nothing like a queen. Just a woman standing at the edge of losing the only thing keeping her together. Alara felt her chest ache painfully. Rhea stopped directly in front of her now, snow gathering across her dark coat, silver eyes searching Alara's face desperately. I endured the curse, Rhea said quietly. I endured war. I endured becoming something this kingdom fears. Her voice cracked slightly for the first time. But I cannot endure losing you. Silence. Then Alara finally reached up and grabbed the front of Rhea's coat. The movement froze both of them. You idiot, Alara whispered shakily. Rhea stared at her. And before fear could stop her, Alara pulled the Supreme Alpha down and kissed her. For one stunned second, Rhea did not move at all. Then suddenly her hands were everywhere, one gripping Alara's waist, the other against the back of her neck. Not violent. Desperate. The storm howled around them while the kiss deepened, hard enough to steal breath from both of them. And for the first time since they met, Rhea stopped holding herself back. When they finally separated, Rhea rested her forehead against Alara's shakily. Come home with me, she whispered. This time, Alara did not run. And far below the mountain cliffs, the lights of Blackthorn Citadel burned through the snow like the beginning of war. By the time Rhea and Alara returned to Blackthorn Citadel, the kingdom was already on the edge of collapse. Temple followers crowded the lower districts carrying silver banners through the snow-covered streets. Noble families had begun gathering private guards behind locked estates. Rumors spread faster than winter wind, some claiming the Supreme Alpha had lost her mind for an Omega, others whispering something far worse. That the Queen had finally chosen a mate. Inside the royal palace, nobody spoke when Rhea walked through the front gates with Alara beside her. Not behind her. Beside her. That difference alone changed everything. The guards lowered their heads immediately. Servants stepped aside without breathing too loudly. Even the nobles waiting near the throne hall fell silent the second Rhea entered the corridor. The queen did not slow once. Her hand remained firmly around Alara's wrist the entire walk through the palace. Possessive. Protective. Certain. The council had already gathered by the time they reached the throne room. High Priestess Malker stood near the center of the chamber, surrounded by temple officials and northern nobles. The moment Alara entered beside Rhea, unease spread visibly across the room. Not because of Alara. Because of Rhea. The Supreme Alpha's pheromones had become dangerously unstable again. Dark silver veins spread faintly beneath the skin near her throat now, flickering like cracks beneath ice. Even standing still, the pressure rolling from her made several guards visibly tense. Malker saw it immediately. Your Majesty, the priestess began carefully, the curse is worsening. Rhea's expression remained cold. I'm aware. The kingdom cannot survive another feral outbreak. The kingdom will survive exactly what I allow it to survive. Murmurs spread through the nobles. Lady Mira stepped forward next. Your Majesty, this has gone too far. The people believe the Omega is tied directly to the curse. Rhea's gaze shifted toward her slowly. Mira. The noble hesitated. Just that single word, her name, spoken quietly, carried enough threat to drain color from her face. Malker stepped in before the silence became fatal. The council requests the Omega be placed under temple protection until this situation stabilizes. Temple protection. Everyone in the room knew what that truly meant. Isolation. Control. Possibly death. Rhea's hand tightened around Alara's wrist instantly. No. The answer came low and absolute. Malker's expression hardened slightly. Then you leave this kingdom no choice. The atmosphere changed at once. Every guard inside the throne hall instinctively reached for their weapons. Rhea slowly stepped forward. The pressure from her pheromones exploded violently through the chamber. Several nobles collapsed to one knee immediately. One of the younger temple officials lost consciousness on the spot. Cracks spread beneath the black marble floor under Rhea's boots. Elara's pulse jumped. The curse was getting worse. Rhea was losing control again. The queen's silver eyes had begun shifting unnaturally, more wolf than human. "Listen carefully," Rhea said softly. "The next person who speaks about taking her from me will not leave this hall alive." No one moved. No one breathed. Then suddenly Rhea staggered. The entire room froze. Dark veins spread rapidly beneath her skin as the curse surged violently through her body. A sharp growl tore from her throat, low and inhuman, enough to send fear crashing across the throne room. "Your Majesty, stay back," Rhea snarled, and the command shook the chamber walls. Guards retreated immediately. Even Malchus stepped backward. Everyone except Elara. The Omega moved toward Rhea without hesitation. "Rhea, don't." Too late. The moment Elara touched Rhea's hand, the room changed. The violent pheromones tearing through the throne hall steadied instantly. Not gone. Balanced. A shocked silence spread through the chamber. Rhea's breathing slowed visibly beneath Elara's touch. The black veins stopped spreading further up her throat. Every noble in the room stared openly. Now they were witnessing it themselves. The lunar Omega bloodline was real. Elara looked up at Rhea slowly. The queen stared back at her like the entire world had narrowed down to this one moment. Then quietly Rhea whispered, "You should run." Elara's chest tightened painfully. "Why?" "Because if I lose control completely," Rhea's voice lowered roughly, "I don't know what I'll become." For the first time since meeting her, Elara saw genuine fear inside the Supreme Alpha's eyes. Not fear of death. Fear of hurting her. That realization shattered the last of Elara's hesitation. Slowly, carefully, she stepped closer. "I'm not afraid of you," Elara whispered. Rhea closed her eyes briefly, like the words physically hurt her. The curse surged again. The throne room lights flickered violently. Several guards backed farther away in panic. Elara realized then that this would never end unless one of them finally chose it completely. Not half-trust. Not restraint. Not fear. Choice. Her fingers slowly rose toward Rhea's face. Then she spoke, clearly enough for the entire throne hall to hear. "I choose you." Silence crashed through the chamber. Rhea's eyes opened immediately. Shock crossed her expression for the first time. Then something inside the Supreme Alpha finally broke. Not violently. Quietly. Her hand rose slowly to Elara's neck, trembling slightly, before stopping beside the Omega's scent gland. One final hesitation. Elara answered it by leaning closer first. That was all Rhea needed. The mate bond snapped into place instantly. A pulse of silver pheromones surged through the throne room like a winter storm, then settled just as quickly into complete stillness. The curse vanished. Not entirely, but enough. The black veins beneath Rhea's skin faded slowly. Her breathing steadied. The monstrous pressure suffocating the throne hall disappeared. For the first time in years, no one moved. No one spoke. Then one of the older guards lowered herself to one knee. Another followed. Then the nobles. Then the soldiers lining the walls. One by one, the entire throne room bowed, not to their queen, but to the bond standing beside her. Rhea looked down at Elara silently. All the rage, exhaustion, and loneliness that had haunted her since the beginning suddenly looked quieter now. Softer. Not weak. Peace. That night, Rhea carried Elara to the royal chambers. Not because Elara couldn't walk, though her legs were shaking badly enough that walking would have been difficult. But because Rhea needed to carry her. Needed to feel Elara's weight against her chest, needed to confirm with every sense that this was real, that the bond hadn't shattered the moment they left the throne room. The doors sealed behind them with a heavy thud. The fire had already been lit. Furs draped across the massive bed. Moonlight spilled through the tall windows, painting silver patterns across the stone floor. Rhea set Alara down gently beside the bed. Then she just stood there, staring at her, like she couldn't quite believe what had happened. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. The bond thrummed between them, a new, strange sensation, like a second heartbeat echoing beneath her skin. She could feel Rhea through it. The Alpha's exhaustion. Her fear. Her desperate, overwhelming need to protect. And beneath all of that, something warmer. Something that felt like home. "Rhea," Alara whispered. The Queen's eyes lifted to hers. The dark veins of the curse had faded to faint shadows beneath her skin, barely visible in the firelight. Her pupils were still slightly dilated, still more wolf than human, but the danger had softened into something else. Something hungry. "I need to mark you," Rhea said. Her voice came rough, strained, like the words were being pulled from somewhere deep. "The bond isn't complete without it." Without. She stopped. Her jaw flexed. "Without everyone knowing you're mine." Heat rushed through Alara's body. Not heat like her cycle, something deeper, more intentional. The bond made everything more intense. Rhea's scent. Her presence. The way her pheromones curled around Alara like smoke, promising things that made Alara's omega instincts purr with anticipation. "Then do it," Alara said quietly. Rhea's eyes darkened. "You understand what this means." It wasn't a question. Alara nodded slowly. "I understand." A claiming bite was permanent. It would bind them together for life, not just emotionally, but biologically. Alara's scent would change. Her heat cycles would sync with Rhea's ruts. Her body would become tuned to the Alpha in ways that couldn't be undone. If Rhea died, the bond would tear through Alara like a physical wound. If Alara died, Rhea would likely follow. But standing there in the firelight with Rhea's silver eyes fixed on her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Alara couldn't imagine wanting anything else. Rhea stepped closer. Her hand rose to Alara's neck, fingers brushing lightly over the scent gland where the mark would go. Alara shivered. The touch sent sparks racing down her spine, made her knees weak, made her omega instincts sing with want. "Last chance," Rhea murmured. Alara reached up and grabbed the front of her coat. "I chose you," she said softly. In front of the entire throne room. In front of the temple. In front of everyone who wants to tear us apart. She pulled Rhea closer. "I'm not changing my mind." Rhea made a sound low, rough, almost wounded. Her forehead pressed against Alara's. Her breathing came fast and uneven. "Alara, mark me." The growl that tore from Rhea's throat wasn't human. Her arms wrapped around Alara's waist, lifting her effortlessly, and then Alara's back hit the furs on the bed. Rhea followed her down, weight pressing her into the mattress, warmth surrounding her on all sides. Pheromones flooded the space between them. Cedar and smoke and something darker, something that smelled like forever. Rhea's mouth found her neck. Not gentle. Not rough either. Careful in a way that made Alara's chest ache. The Queen's lips brushed over her scent gland once, twice, teasing, tasting, making Alara squirm beneath her. "You smell." Rhea's voice vibrated against her skin. "Incredible." Alara's hands fisted in Rhea's hair. "Stop talking." A huff of laughter. Then Rhea's teeth sank into her throat. Alara gasped. Pain, sharp and bright, lasting only a second, then heat flooded through her, overwhelming, consuming. The bond blazed to life between them, silver fire racing along every nerve, every vein, every hidden corner of her soul. Rhea's pheromones crashed over her like a wave. Alara's body arched beneath the alpha's, responding instinctively, belonging in a way she had never experienced before. When Rhea finally pulled back, her lips were red with Alara's blood. The mark sat dark and permanent against Alara's throat, a claiming bite that would scar Silver, visible to everyone who looked at her. "Mine," the bond seemed to whisper. "Mine, mine, mine." Rhea stared down at her with something like wonder in her silver eyes. "Mine," she said aloud, voice rough. Alara pulled her down into a kiss. And when they finally came together, when Rhea's body joined with hers, when the pleasure built and crested and shattered between them, Alara felt the last remnants of the curse dissolve. Not gone forever. It would always be part of Rhea, part of what she was. But quiet now. Leashed. Bound to an Omega who wasn't afraid to touch her. 3 weeks later, Alara woke with her stomach turning inside out. She barely made it to the basin beside the bed before her breakfast came back up. Her body heaved, trembling until there was nothing left but bitter bile and the taste of sickness. Behind her, the bed shifted. "Alara?" Rhea's voice came rough with sleep, but the bond carried her alarm, sharp and immediate, cutting through the early morning darkness. "I'm fine," Alara rasped, even as another wave of nausea rolled through her. She wasn't fine. She hadn't been fine for days. The nausea had started small, just a twinge in the mornings, easily ignored. But it had grown worse each day, spreading through her afternoons, then her evenings, until now she could barely keep down water. Her heats had stopped too. That should have been the first sign. She was supposed to have entered heat a week ago, but nothing had happened. No fever. No cravings. Just this constant, relentless sickness. Rhea's hand pressed against her back, warm and steady. "You're burning up." "I'm not," Alara touched her own forehead. Her skin felt clammy, but not feverish. "It's just nausea. Probably something I ate." Rhea's silence spoke louder than words. The queen rose from the bed and crossed to the door. Alara heard her speaking to the guards outside, low, urgent, commanding. Within minutes, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Healer Saren arrived before the sun had fully risen. The old beta woman took one look at Alara, pale, trembling, still hunched over the basin, and her eyes narrowed. "How long?" "About a week," Alara admitted. "Maybe longer." "And your heat?" "Missed it." Saren's expression didn't change. But something flickered in her eyes, something that made Alara's heart stutter in her chest. "Lie down," she said. "I need to examine you." Rhea stood against the wall, arms crossed, silver eyes tracking every movement. Her pheromones had sharpened with anxiety, filling the room with the scent of cedar and storm clouds. Saren ignored her. She had dealt with possessive alphas before. Her hands pressed against Alara's abdomen, gentle, methodical, searching. She checked her pulse, her temperature, her scent glands. She asked about her appetite, her sleep, her energy levels. Then she sat back and looked at Alara with something that might have been wonder. "You're pregnant." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Alara's mind went blank. "What?" "Your body is changing," Saren said calmly. "The nausea, the missed heat, the sensitivity, it's all consistent with early pregnancy." The bond accelerated the process. Lunar Omega biology is different. More receptive to alpha seed. Rhea had gone completely still. Alara looked at her, at the shock on her face, the disbelief, the way her hands had started trembling slightly at her sides. "I'm pregnant." Alara's voice came out high and thin. Saren nodded. "Approximately 4 weeks. The bond likely triggered ovulation outside your normal cycle." She glanced at Rhea. Lunar Omegas were known for high fertility, especially with bonded mates. It's why the bloodline was so carefully controlled. Alara's hand drifted to her stomach. It didn't feel any different. Still flat beneath her sleep shirt, still familiar. But something had changed. Something was growing inside her. Rhea's child. The queen moved. One moment she was against the wall. The next, she was kneeling beside the bed, hands hovering over Alara's like she was afraid to touch. Her silver eyes searched Alara's face, desperate, hopeful, terrified. Is this? Her voice broke. She swallowed and tried again. Do you want? Yes, Alara said, before Rhea could finish the question. Yes, I want this. I want. She couldn't finish either. Rhea pulled her into her arms, careful, reverent, holding Alara like she was something precious. The bond blazed between them, joy and fear and hope and love, all tangled together until Alara couldn't tell where her emotions ended and Rhea's began. A child, Rhea whispered against her hair. Our child. Alara buried her face in Rhea's chest and breathed. The pregnancy changed everything. Not between Alara and Rhea, that bond had only grown stronger, deeper, more certain with each passing day. But the court changed. The whispers shifted. No longer was Alara just the mysterious Omega who had somehow tamed the Supreme Alpha's curse. Now she was carrying the heir to the throne. The temple fell silent. The riots dissolved. The nobles who had called for Alara's removal suddenly couldn't stop smiling at her in corridors, couldn't stop congratulating Rhea on the blessed news. Hypocrites, all of them. But Alara found that she didn't care. Let them pretend. Let them scheme. Let them whisper behind their hands. She had Rhea. She had their child growing inside her. She had a future, something she had never dared to imagine, not in 18 years of carrying linens and scrubbing floors and disappearing into the background. The first time she felt the baby move, she was alone in the Western Strategy Chamber. A flutter, soft and small, like butterfly wings against her insides. Alara's hand pressed to her stomach. Her breath caught. Rhea, she sent through the bond, not caring that it was the middle of a council meeting. Come here. The queen burst through the doors 30 seconds later, wild-eyed, pheromones spiking with alarm. What's wrong? Are you hurt? Is it? Put your hand here. Alara guided Rhea's palm to the swell of her belly. For a moment, nothing happened. Rhea's brow furrowed. Her mouth opened. Then the baby kicked. Rhea went completely still. Her silver eyes widened. Her hand pressed more firmly against Alara's stomach, as if trying to feel it again, to confirm it was real. That's our child, Alara said softly. Rhea looked at her with something like awe. And then the Supreme Alpha, the most feared woman in the kingdom, the monster whose curse had made kingdoms tremble, lowered her head and pressed a kiss to Alara's belly. Hello, she whispered against the swell. I'm your mother. Alara's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. Winter had nearly passed by the time the baby came. The snows had begun to melt. Crocus flowers pushed through the frozen ground in the palace gardens. And somewhere in the early hours of the morning, Alara woke to pain deep and pulling, spreading through her lower back and abdomen like waves. She didn't need to call for Rhea. The bond carried everything. The queen was awake before Alara could form words, already moving, already shouting for the healers, for Saren, for help. Hours passed. Alara lost track of time somewhere between the 2nd hour and the 5th. Pain blurred together, punctuated by Rhea's hand gripping hers, Rhea's voice in her ear, Rhea's pheromones wrapping around her like a shield. You're doing so well, the Alpha murmured against her sweat-soaked hair. Just a little longer. You're so strong, Alara. So beautiful. I love you. I love you. I love you. Alara had never heard Rhea say those words before. Not once, in all the months they had been together. She sobbed from pain, from exhaustion, from the overwhelming rightness of hearing it. And then, finally, a cry. Sharp and furious, filling the chamber with the unmistakable sound of new life. It's a girl, Saren announced. She placed the baby on Alara's chest, red-faced, squalling, tiny fists waving. Dark hair plastered to her scalp. Silver eyes that blinked open for just a moment, unfocused and new, before squeezing shut again. Alara's arms closed around her automatically. Protect, her Omega instincts roared. Protect, protect, protect. Rhea stared down at them both. Her face had gone slack with wonder. Her hand, the hand that had killed enemies, that had shattered stone, that had torn through armies, reached out to touch the baby's cheek with impossible gentleness. She's perfect, Rhea whispered. Alara laughed through her tears. She's covered in blood and screaming. She's perfect. Rhea leaned down and kissed Alara, soft, lingering, tasting of salt and tears. Thank you, she said against Alara's lips. Thank you for staying. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for... Stop talking, Alara mumbled, exhausted, happy, and hold your daughter. Rhea lifted the baby like she was handling spun glass. The little girl squirmed. Her face scrunched up. For one terrifying moment, Alara thought she would start screaming again. Then the baby's silver eyes opened and locked onto Rhea's face and calmed. The same way Alara calmed the curse. The same inexplicable, impossible resonance that had brought them together in the first place. Rhea's breath caught. She has your gift, she said softly. Alara looked at her daughter, at the tiny hand that had wrapped around Rhea's thumb, at the peaceful expression that had replaced the screaming, at the silver eyes that mirrored her mother's. She has you, Alara corrected. That's what matters. Epilogue. 1 year later. The monster the kingdom once feared learned how to rest beside the person she loved most. It wasn't easy. Nothing about their story had ever been easy. There were still challenges, political enemies who whispered in dark corners, remnants of the curse that sometimes stirred when Rhea grew too exhausted, sleepless nights with a teething infant who seemed to have inherited her mother's stubbornness. But there was also this. Alara sat beside the fireplace inside the royal chambers, their daughter asleep against her chest. The girl, Lyra, named for the constellation that had shone brightest the week she was born, had finally stopped fussing, her little face peaceful, her tiny hand curled around Alara's thumb. Rhea sat on the floor beside them, head resting against Alara's knee. The Supreme Alpha's eyes were closed. Her breathing had gone slow and even. The dark veins of the curse were barely visible now, faint shadows that only appeared when she was truly exhausted, and even then, they faded the moment Alara touched her. Outside the windows, winter snow fell softly over Blackthorn Citadel. Inside, there was only warmth. Only silence. Only the quiet bond that connected the three of them, Alpha, Omega, Child, into something unbreakable. I love you, Rhea murmured through the bond, not bothering to open her eyes. Alara smiled. I know. She looked down at their daughter, at the silver eyes that blinked open for just a moment, meeting Alara's gaze, then Rhea's, before closing again in peaceful sleep. And in that moment, surrounded by everything she had never dared to want, Alara Vance, now Alara Morvain, consort of the Northern Kingdom, mother of the air, felt nothing but gratitude. For the night she had climbed those stairs. For the Alpha who had fought her own nature to keep her safe. For the child who had come from that impossible, terrifying, beautiful love. And for the monster who had finally found her home. The end.